She actually reached for my house keys while the roast was still on the table. I sat there stunned, Susan's voice still echoing. "You're an expensive burden, Dad." Then Peter said it. Guardianship. Like I'd lost my mind. They'd already drained my accounts behind my back. Now they wanted my name, my home, my dignity. I could barely speak. They laughed in the next room while I packed a suitcase, but they forgot one thing. I kept every record and the key to my secret vault, still taped under my desk drawer. I walked out of that house with nothing except the proof to destroy everything they built. I never planned on revenge, but they gave me no choice, and I knew exactly where I'd make them pay. My name is Walter Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I sit in my paid-for kitchen, brewing black coffee in the same pot I've used for decades. My late wife, Margaret, would have been proud of how I've kept things running since she passed, covering our daughter Susan's mortgage payments, funding our grandson Tommy's college applications, even rescuing our son-in-law David's business from bankruptcy. The gold pocket watch my father gave me ticked steadily on the counter, marking time as I noticed Susan's smile growing thinner, David's eyes calculating costs, and our son Peter whispering about future security when he thinks I can't hear. They don't know about the vault key in my desk drawer or the careful records I've kept since before they were born. But let me start from the beginning. Sunday dinners had been our tradition since Margaret passed. Even now, I can smell that roast in the oven, perfectly timed like always, 3 hours at 3:50, just the way she taught me. The familiar scent of rosemary and garlic filled every corner of the kitchen I'd kept spotless all these years. You know the kind of cleaning I mean, where every surface gleams because it's more than just wiping, it's keeping memories polished. I'd just finished setting out the good china, Margaret's wedding gift from her mother, when I heard their cars pull up. The sound of doors slamming echoed a bit harder than usual, but I brushed it off. Susan came in first, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd refinished. Myself, last spring. Peter followed. Then David, all of them wearing smiles that seemed stretched too tight across their faces. "Something smells amazing, Dad," Susan called out, but her voice carried an odd pitch, like she was performing for an audience that wasn't there. Have you ever heard someone's voice and just known something was wrong? They settled around the table, the same oak piece where we'd shared 20 years of celebrations and sorrows. I noticed Susan's hand shake slightly as she reached into her purse. That's when the air in the room changed, like the pause before a thunderstorm breaks. "Dad," she said, sliding a white envelope across the polished wood. "We need to discuss something important." Peter leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine with a challenge I'd never seen before. Not since he was a teenager trying to stay out past curfew. But this wasn't about late nights anymore. My fingers felt stiff as I reached for the envelope, something cold settling in my stomach before I even touched the paper. The letter inside was crisp, formal, legal language that seemed to mock every family photo on my walls. "Notice of eviction," it read at the top, followed by cold phrases about household sustainability and necessary relocation. The words blurred together, but one phrase stood out like a slap. 30 days to vacate. "You're an expensive burden, Dad," Peter said, each word deliberate and sharp. "We can't keep carrying you." David, my son-in-law, nodded along like some bobblehead doll. This man whose business I'd saved twice with my retirement savings now couldn't even look me in the eye. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I paid for this house in cash. I helped with your mortgages, the kids' college funds." "That was then," Susan cut in, her voice taking on that tone she uses with difficult clients at her law firm. "We need to think about our futures now. The grandkids' education, our retirement plans. We can't keep supporting 2 households." The room started to spin slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table, the same table where I'd helped Peter with his math homework, where Susan had announced her engagement, where we'd all grieved together when Margaret passed. Heat crawled up my neck as realization hit. This wasn't a family discussion. This was a sentencing, dressed up as Sunday dinner. "You're costing us our future," Peter added, the words falling like stones into the silence. "We've done the math. Between property taxes, utilities, and your medical expenses." I barely heard the rest. My fingers had gone numb when Susan stood up, her hand extended. "We'll need your house keys, Dad. We've already found a nice assisted living facility that..." The roast timer chimed then, a cheerful ding that seemed to mock everything we'd just destroyed. The sound of my father's pocket watch ticking on the counter suddenly felt deafening in the silence that followed. Have you ever watched your whole world collapse over a Sunday roast? Everything you thought you knew about family, about love, about trust, all of it unraveling between the mashed potatoes and green beans. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled up my banking app, something my granddaughter had installed last Christmas, telling me how with it I was for learning technology. The screen's glow felt accusatory in the dimming dining room. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite like watching your life's careful planning dissolve into digits that don't add up. This can't be right, I muttered, scrolling through, transaction after transaction. The property tax payment cleared last week. I had over 40,000 in checking. Susan's chair scraped against the floor as she moved closer. Dad, we've consolidated your accounts for medical oversight. She used that lawyer tone again, the one that makes everything sound reasonable even when it's not. It's for your own protection. Protection? The word tasted bitter. I've managed these accounts for 50 years. Never missed a payment, never bounced a check. My voice cracked slightly and I hated how it betrayed my age. I even kept spreadsheets of Peter's business loans. That's exactly why we're concerned, Peter chimed in from across the table. All these papers and accounts, maybe it's time we discussed guardianship. It might be inevitable given your... He waved his hand vaguely, like he was trying to catch the right euphemism for old. David cleared his throat, straightening his tie, the same tie I'd given him last Father's Day. There's significant liability exposure here, Walter. The property alone, well, we can't risk any unfortunate decisions. You know what's strange? How quickly a home of 40 years can shrink to what fits in a suitcase. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, our bedroom, though Margaret's side of the closet still held her things. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, my legs heavy with the weight of betrayal rather than age. The suitcase creaked as I opened it. Margaret's old Samsonite, the one we'd used on our last trip to Niagara Falls. I folded 2 sweaters she'd knitted, laying them carefully between layers of pressed shirts. Every movement was mechanical, like I was watching someone else pack up their life. Remember when I mentioned my father's gold pocket watch? I wrapped it in a handkerchief and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The weight of it against my chest felt like the only real thing left in a world gone sideways. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. You could smell rain coming, mixed with wood smoke from the Henderson's chimney 2 doors down. Amazing how normal everything looked. Same streetlights, same cracked sidewalk I kept meaning to fix, same maple tree dropping its first yellow leaves. The lock clicked behind me with a finality that hollowed out my chest. Then I heard it, laughter drifting through the windows. My own children, laughing while they erased me from my home. Standing under the streetlight, watching my breath cloud in the autumn air, I wondered who'd believe me. What judge would take the word of a confused old man over a respected lawyer and businessman? They'd probably come armed with doctor's notes about cognitive decline and financial risks. But then something strange happened. You know how memories sometimes float up when you least expect them? Well, there under that flickering streetlight, I saw something clear as day. A small brass key taped beneath my old desk drawer. A key to a bank box from, was it 82? 83. March 15th, 1983, I whispered to the empty street, the date surfacing like a life preserver in rough waters. That's when I'd opened that safety deposit box, back when banks still gave you actual passbooks and handwritten receipts. The sound of more laughter filtered through the windows behind me, but it didn't hollow me out this time. Instead, I felt something else stirring, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, waiting for just this moment to wake up. You ever notice how every cheap motel room sounds exactly the same? That constant hum of an ancient radiator, like some tired metal beast trying to remember how to breathe. The curtains were so thin they might as well have been tissue paper, letting in every flash of neon from the vacancy sign outside. I'd chosen the Garden View Inn off Route 16, though the only garden I could see was a crushed beer can nestled in a patch of dead grass. Still, it was clean enough, and the night clerk hadn't asked questions when I paid cash for a week. Funny how quickly you learn to appreciate small mercies. That first night stretched longer than any I could remember since Margaret passed. I laid there counting ceiling cracks while my phone buzzed like an angry hornet. 17 messages, 23, 31. each one a little digital stab in the dark. When dawn finally crept through those tissue paper curtains, I made myself look at the screen. That's when I saw them. Social media posts from my own flesh and blood, painting a picture that turned my stomach. Keeping Dad safe from financial mistakes, Susan had written, with one of those concerned face emojis that made my teeth clench. David's post was worse. Sometimes the hardest choices are the most necessary. Protecting assets from cognitive decline isn't easy. You'd think after 75 years, you'd be immune to shame. You'd be wrong. Each comment, each sympathetic response from their friends felt like sandpaper against raw skin. Then the phone call started. Credit card companies I'd never dealt with, asking about missed payments. A mortgage company claiming I'd taken out a second loan on my fully paid house, mind you. Each caller more insistent than the last, all citing paperwork I'd supposedly signed. "Sir, we just need to verify the latest charges," one particularly persistent woman said. "The applications were processed last month." "I never applied for anything," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. "Never signed a single form." "The signatures indicate otherwise, Mr. Whitaker. Perhaps you've forgotten." That's when something shifted inside me, like a glacier that's been creaking for years suddenly breaking free. The shame that had been freezing my gut hardened into something else, something with edges sharp enough to cut. Remember that key I mentioned? The one taped under my old desk drawer. The memory of it kept getting clearer, like a photograph slowly developing in my mind. I could see exactly where I'd hidden it, feel the texture of the tape I'd used. The storage unit where I'd kept my old office furniture was only 20 minutes away. Funny how I'd kept paying that bill all these years, even when David insisted I was wasting money on junk. Not so worthless now, was it, son? The desk was right where I'd left it, buried under boxes of Christmas decorations Margaret had loved too much to throw away. My hands shook as I ran them along the bottom of that center drawer. For a moment, my heart stopped. Had someone found it? But there it was, exactly where I'd left it 40 years ago. The tape had gone yellow with age, but it held. The key felt heavier than I remembered, its jagged edge pressing into my palm like a promise or a warning. I stood there in that storage unit, surrounded by the ghosts of happier times, wondering if I was chasing shadows. Did the box even exist anymore? Had the bank maintained it all these years? Or had they cleared it out when the fees lapsed? I couldn't face another sleepless night without knowing. Called the bank right there from the storage unit, dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. "Yes, sir," the receptionist said after checking. "We can. Schedule an appointment for tomorrow morning at 9:30. You'll need 2 forms of ID and your box key." I wrote down the details in my old pocket notebook, "Some habits die hard," and made myself rehearse what I'd say. Had to sound calm, rational, no hint of desperation that might make them doubt me. "Good morning, I'd like to access my safety deposit box. Here's my identification and key." Simple, direct, no room for questions about my competence. Back in that humming motel room, I set my alarm for 7 and placed the key on the nightstand where I could see it. Propped my father's pocket watch next to it, the gold catching the last rays of sunset through those tissue paper curtains. The bank lobby smelled exactly like I remembered. Paper, polish, and that particular mix of anxiety and importance that seems to seep into financial institutions. You know that smell? Like money and worry having a quiet conversation. I'd gotten there early, my ID and key arranged neatly in my wallet. No rushing, no fumbling. When you're my age, people watch for signs of confusion like hawks eyeing field mice. I wasn't about to give them anything to see. "Good morning," I said to the young woman at the desk. "I have an appointment to access my safety deposit box." My voice came out smooth as summer butter, though my heart was doing jumping jacks. She checked her computer. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Yes, our manager, Mr. Peterson, will assist you." Peterson turned out to be about 40, with the kind of suit that suggested he took himself very seriously. But his handshake was firm, and he didn't do that thing younger folks often do, talking extra loud and slow like age had damaged my hearing instead of just silvered my hair. "Right this way, sir," he said, leading me down a hushed corridor where our footsteps seemed to echo off the marble floors. The sound reminded me of church, and maybe that was fitting. I was about to face my own kind of judgment day. The vault area looked unchanged since the Carter administration, all steel and serious business. Peterson had me sign the access ledger, his pen scratching against paper, the only sound in that tomb-quiet room. When we reached my box, I didn't hesitate. Slid my key in smooth as silk, turned it in sync with Peterson's master key. The box drew out with a whisper of metal on metal that sent a shiver up my spine. The moment that lid lifted, I had to remind myself to breathe. There they were, just as I'd left them. 3 manila folders, edges slightly yellowed but intact. My hands didn't shake at all as I lifted them out. Funny how certainty can steady you. "Would you like a private viewing room?" Peterson asked. I nodded, following him to a small chamber with a felt-covered table and good lighting. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone with 40 years of careful record-keeping. First folder, deeds, the house papers, showing full payment in cash, sole ownership in my name. Second folder, bonds, which I'd nearly forgotten about, but it was the third folder that made my pulse quicken. Loans to family. I spread the documents across that dark green, felt like dealing a winning poker hand. Every signature right where it should be, in handwriting I knew as well as my own. David's sharp slants, Susan's looping curves, her husband Tom's hasty scrawl. "I understand times are tight, Dad," Susan had said 5 years back, when she'd needed $30,000 for Tom's business venture. "We'll pay you back as soon as it turns a profit." The terms were there in black and white, written at their insistence. To demonstrate our commitment to repayment, they'd said. Full amount plus 3% interest due within 60 months. Signed, dated, witnessed. David's loan for his kids' college funds, another $40,000. Tom's second try at entrepreneurship, $25,000 more. Each one documented, each one still unpaid, each one with their signatures bold at the bottom. My phone's camera clicked quietly as I photographed every page, uploaded them straight to my cloud storage. Another modern trick they probably thought I was too old to manage. Made a second copy just to be safe. When I'd captured everything, I returned the originals to their folders and locked them away again. No point taking them now. The copies would serve my purpose, and the bank was safer than any place I could keep them. Peterson walked me back to the lobby, probably wondering why the slight smile on my face didn't match my circumstances. If he'd known I'd just loaded a gun with 40 years' worth of bullets, he might have understood. Outside, the winter sun hit me like a spotlight. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening the family calendar I still had access to, another thing they'd forgotten to cut me off from. There it was, bold and proud. Tyler's wedding. 2 weeks. My grandson's big day. The event they'd all be attending, where they planned to play Happy Family while I sat alone in my rented room. My heart thumped so loud I had to stop walking, right there on the sidewalk, as the pieces all clicked into place. Back in my rented room, I pulled the desk chair close and spread out a fresh notebook. You know the kind. Spiral-bound, college-ruled like the ones I used to buy for my grandkids every August. The familiar blue lines helped me think straight. Wedding day objectives, I wrote at the E top, then underlined it twice. My handwriting wasn't as steady as it used to be, but it was still readable. Had to be for what was coming. First item. Arrive early, 4:30 p.m. No chance of them blocking the door if I was already inside. Besides, I'd always believed punctuality showed respect. Even if they'd forgotten that lesson, I hadn't. Second, certified copies. Full set. The originals would stay safe in their vault, but I needed official full weight behind every page I'd bring. Remember when a handshake meant something? These days you need watermarks and stamps to make truth stick. Third, and this one made me pause, find someone with authority, someone who couldn't be dismissed as just another guest, someone who'd have to acknowledge legal documents, someone who'd make them listen. I reached for my phone and opened the family group chat I hadn't been removed from yet, scrolled back through messages I'd been ignored in, looking for wedding details. There it was, Susan gushing about how prestigious it would be to have Cousin Michael officiate. My coffee went cold while I digested that piece of luck. Michael, the family lawyer, Harvard Law if I remembered right, always had a decent head on his shoulders even if we hadn't talked much lately. More importantly, he had a reputation to protect. I let myself picture it for a moment. Susan's carefully made-up face crumpling as Michael read out the loan terms. David's swagger deflating as the numbers added up. Part of me wanted to handle it privately, give them one last chance to do right. Then my phone buzzed with another creditor's call, third one this week. I opened Facebook to find fresh comments on David's post about his financially irresponsible father. The choice crystallized like frost on a window. They'd chosen public humiliation, so they'd get public consequences. Next morning, I visited a notary in a strip mall office. She had kind eyes behind thick glasses, reminded me of my late wife's sister. Didn't ask questions, just stamped and certified each page I needed. The stack made a satisfying weight in my briefcase. Notice of intent to collect, I typed out on my ancient laptop. Nothing fancy, just dates and facts. When they borrowed, what they promised, what they owed. Hit print, added it to the pile. Sometimes the simplest words hit hardest. Back at my desk, I practiced what I'd say. Had to keep it clean, keep it calm. October 12th, 2018. $30,000 to Thomas Wheeler for business expansion. Pause. February 3rd, 2019. $40,000 to David Whitaker for children's education. Another pause. All signed, all witnessed, all unpaid. Above the desk, I taped an index card with a single line. Saturday, 5 p.m., the wedding hour. Every time I looked up, it reminded me what I was working toward. No room for doubt now, no space for second thoughts. Still, I had to plan for resistance. They might try to stop me at the door, claim I wasn't on the guest list. So I mapped it out. I'd wait in the hotel lobby if I had to, time my entrance for when they'd be too busy with ceremony preparations to notice. Michael would be there early too, reviewing his notes. Perfect timing to present him with one more legal matter to consider. I closed the notebook and set my father's pocket watch beside the stack of certified papers. Its steady tick-tick-tick matched my pulse, reminded me of his voice. Stand your ground, son, but do it smart. The watch face caught the afternoon light, throwing back a gleam like a wink. Next to it, the papers waited, ammunition stacked, neat as rifle rounds. In 2 days, they'd learn what I'd known all along. Documentation beats denial every time. When the final demand letter arrived yesterday morning, Susan's handiwork was all over it. Only she knew about that old Visa card I'd closed years ago. The paper shook in my hands, not from age, mind you, but from the kind of anger that starts in your gut and climbs up slow. You ever notice how betrayal has its own smell? Like copper, pennies and burnt coffee. I stood there in my rented room, that letter crackling between my fingers, nearly tearing it straight down the middle. The letterhead looked important enough. Notice of delinquent accounts and consideration for protective oversight. That's when the first real doubt hit me, cold as January rain. What if I walked into that wedding with my stack of papers and they just laughed? What if Michael took one look and decided I was exactly what they claimed? Just a confused old man clutching at paperwork he didn't understand? I had to get out of that room. The walls were closing in like one of those old movie scenes, you know the type. Grabbed my coat and headed for the street, counting breaths like Martha taught me during her last hospital stay. 1 block, 2. The winter air bit at my face, but it helped clear my head. Martha's voice came to me then, clear as if she was walking right beside me. Fear's a poor advisor, Walt, she'd say. It makes you see giants where there's only windmills. She'd loved that Don Quixote story, read it every spring. My hand was actually on the phone, ready to call Michael and cancel the whole thing when it buzzed. Another creditor. This one didn't even pretend to be polite. Given your apparent cognitive decline, Mr. Whitaker, guardianship proceedings may be in everyone's best interest. Cognitive decline. My hands stopped shaking right then and there. Funny how anger can steady you sometimes, isn't it? Back in my room, I spread everything out on the bed, started sorting the loan documents by date, watching our family history unfold in signatures and dollar signs. Thomas's business loan with his messy scrawl at the bottom, Susan's grad school money, her signature still showing traces of that flourish. She practiced for hours as a teenager. David's house down payment, with the note he'd written, "Thanks, Dad, I'll pay you back every cent." The truth has a weight to it, doesn't it? You can feel it in your hands when you hold it. These weren't confused scribblings. They were a record of promises made and broken. I opened my laptop and typed up a 1-page summary. Clean, simple. No emotion, just facts. Try twisting that into confusion, Susan. Found a heavy-duty plastic folder at the drugstore, the kind that seals against weather. Can't have a sudden rain or spilled drink ruining my ammunition, right? Slipped everything inside in order, then added copies of their social media posts about my financial irresponsibility. Amazing how people forget screenshots exist. My good jacket, the charcoal one Martha always liked, hung ready on the bathroom door. Pressed shirt beneath it. Dark blue tie. They wanted to paint me as some doddering fool. Fine. Let them try that when I walked in looking sharper than their lawyer. Set my alarm for dawn. Needed that last rehearsal. Needed to know every number and date by heart. No fumbling, no hesitation. Just facts delivered with the kind of calm that makes people nervous. The lamp clicked off with a finality that felt right. In the darkness, that old radiator ticked away like it was counting down the hours. Each click brought me closer to 5 p.m. Saturday, closer to the moment when documentation would trump denial. I lay there thinking about Martha again. The truth doesn't need much decoration, she'd say. It just needs to be spoken plain. The radiator ticked. My watch ticked back, both of them marking time until justice would tick its way home. The alarm didn't need to wake me. I was already up, watching the sky fade from black to grey through those thin curtains. Funny how the biggest days of your life never let you sleep in, isn't it? I stood in front of the mirror, straightening my tie for the third time. July 15th, 2018, I said to my reflection. Thomas requests $40,000 for inventory expansion. Signs promissory note with quarterly payments. My voice was steady, just like I'd practiced. September 3rd, 2019. Susan needs grad school covered. Signs agreement for repayment upon employment. The timeline was burned into my memory now, each date and dollar amount as clear as my own name. I grabbed the folder, checked its seal one last time, and headed for the bus stop. The morning air had that crisp February bite to it, the kind that makes your ears sting but keeps your mind sharp. At the stop, I kept rehearsing under my breath. An early jogger gave me a strange look as she passed. Probably thought I was one of those folks who talk to themselves. Maybe I was, but every word was another brick in the wall I'd build between their lies and my truth. The bus ride across town gave me time to steady my nerves. Remember when buses used to cost $0.25 and drivers made change? Now it's all plastic cards and digital readers. The world keeps moving forward, but some things, like keeping your word, those shouldn't change. The bank opened at 9. Margaret, the notary I'd worked with before, was already at her desk. Sweet lady. Reminds me of my sister, Jean, same way of looking over her glasses when she's being serious. "Another affidavit, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, pulling out her stamp and ledger. "Last one," I told her. "Just need to certify these are the original signatures." Her stamp came down with a solid thunk. Official. Final. No turning back now. While waiting for my next bus, I sent Michael, my lawyer cousin, a text. "Need 2 minutes after the vows for an important family matter, private but urgent." He replied with a simple, "Okay," and I could work with that. The venue was one of those converted industrial spaces, all exposed brick and iron beams. Real fancy, probably cost more than my first house. I arrived an hour early, found a leather chair in the lobby with a clear view of the entrance. The folder sat heavy in my lap while I watched guests arrive in their Sunday best. Susan would have to pass right by me to reach the main hall. She'd been posting pictures all morning. Her hair, her dress, her mother-of-the-groom flowers, everything perfectly arranged, just like she'd arranged my exile. Thomas's voice carried across the lobby. Completely self-made, you know. Built it all from scratch. He was holding court with some older gentleman, probably business associates. My fingers tightened on the folder until I heard the plastic crinkle. Had to force myself to relax, to breathe like Martha taught me during her chemo sessions. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I watched Michael arrive in his officiant's robe, ceremony script in hand. He caught my eye, gave a small nod. Good man, Michael. Always had a strong sense of right and wrong. Even as a kid, he'd understand why this had to happen today. The coordinator, young woman with a headset and clipboard, started herding people toward the main doors. Music swelled from inside, something classical with lots of strings. Guests hurried to their seats while the bridal party lined up in the hall. "Places, everyone!" The coordinator's voice had that forced cheer they all seemed to master. "We're starting in 2 minutes." I stood up, smoothing my jacket. The folder felt like it weighed 100 pounds now, heavy with all those broken promises and convenient lies. The doors swung open, and I could see down the aisle to where Michael stood at the altar. Time to walk through that threshold. Time to turn their perfect fairy tale back into reality. I slipped into the back row just as the string quartet hit their final note. My daughter's shoulders tensed. She knew I was there without turning. Funny how family can sense each other that way, even when they're pretending you don't exist. The ceremony rolled on like a perfectly rehearsed play. Susan dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief when my grandson exchanged vows with his bride. Thomas stood tall in his designer suit, probably still making mental notes about which guests might be useful for business later. You know the type. Always networking, even at their own son's wedding. I kept my eyes on Michael, tracking his words as he worked through the ceremony script. My folder lay quiet in my lap, but every few minutes I'd touch it, just to make sure it was real. The leather chairs they'd set up for guests were comfortable. Too comfortable, really. Made me want to sink in and disappear, but I couldn't. Not today. By the power vested in me, Michael's voice carried clear and strong, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The applause started, right on cue. Before it could fade, before the happy couple could make their way back down the aisle, I stood up. My knees protested. They never did like these fancy chairs, but I straightened my back and stepped into the aisle. "Cousin Michael," I called out. My voice didn't shake, thank God. "Before the reception begins, I request acknowledgement as father of the bride's parent." The room didn't exactly go quiet, more like it held its breath. Susan's face went from wedding day glow to thundercloud in about 2 seconds flat. I could feel Thomas's glare burning holes in my jacket. There was one of those portable lecterns off to the side, probably for the reception speeches. I moved it center stage, right where everyone could see. The folder made a solid sound when I set it down. Good quality paper always does. September 3rd, 2019, I read, unfolding the first certified copy. Loan agreement signed by Susan Whitaker Brooks for graduate school tuition, amount $68,000. Terms of repayment clearly stated upon securing employment. My hands were steady as I laid out the documents. The notary's seal caught the light from those fancy overhead chandeliers. March 15th, 2020. Thomas Brooks Business Expansion Loan, $120,000. His signature right here, with repayment terms he suggested himself. Someone gasped. Probably one of those business associates he'd been bragging to earlier. You could hear people shifting in their seats, silk dresses rustling, suit jackets creaking. "Cousin Michael, as an officer of the court, would you please verify these signatures?" Thomas lunged forward then, his face red as a summer tomato. "This is ridiculous. You can't—" Michael's hand went up. "Calm, as you please. As the efficient and a legal professional, I have an obligation to review any formal documents presented during proceedings." He adjusted his glasses and bent over the papers. "These appear to be properly notarized. The signatures match known examples." I kept my eyes fixed on Susan's bouquet, white roses with baby's breath. One of the petals broke loose and drifted down, landing right next to my evidence folder. Seemed fitting somehow. Michael cleared his throat and read in that formal, lawyer voice of his, "In the event of default or attempted evasion, all loans become immediately due and payable, with standard market interest from date of signature. Both parties acknowledge this agreement as legally binding." The silence in that fancy wedding hall was thick enough to cut with a knife. Even the wedding photographer had stopped clicking away, her camera hanging loose around her neck. I looked straight at my daughter then. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, was still clutching that bouquet like it might save her. "Will you honor your own signatures today?" The question hung in the air like frost. The weight of 30 years in banking taught me something valuable. Real power moves quiet. Michael proved that as he adjusted his glasses, looking more like the corporate lawyer he was than a wedding officiant now. "As an officer of the court," he said, each word measured like gold on a scale, "I'm compelled to acknowledge these documents as legally binding contracts." He laid his hand flat on the papers, and I swear you could hear a pin drop in that ballroom. Given the evidence of systematic misrepresentation and potential fraud, immediate protective measures are warranted. Thomas's face had gone from red to something closer to purple. "You can't be serious. Those were gifts. Dad always said they were gifts." His voice cracked on the last word, reminding me of when he was 12 and got caught stealing from his mother's purse. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't have to. just pointed to the bottom of page 3, where Thomas had initialed next to the clause he'd insisted on himself. This constitutes a formal loan agreement, not a gift, with full expectation of repayment. Michael nodded, his expression professionally neutral. The intent is clearly documented, with multiple witnesses to the original signing. He glanced at his watch, probably worth more than my old car, and made a small gesture to one of the venue staff. That's when I noticed movement near the back of the room. 2 men in expensive suits were making their way forward, their faces set in those tight lines I recognized from my banking days. Had to be Jim Harrison and Pete Chen, Thomas's biggest lenders. They'd been bragging about their investment group just last Christmas. "Counselor," Jim said quietly to Michael, "we'd like to discuss possible implications regarding certain financial representations made to our firm. Remember what I said about real power moving quiet? The way Pete Chen was tapping his phone, you'd think he was just checking messages. But I knew that look. He was already calling his risk management team. No joy in watching it unfold. No glee. Just felt like weights shifting on an old scale, finding their proper balance at last. Every action has its consequence. My father taught me that standing in his workshop when I was just a boy. The smell of sawdust and machine oil comes back to me sometimes, along with his voice. The truth ain't always pretty, son, but it's always fair." A security guard appeared at Michael's elbow, professional in his dark blazer. They had a brief whispered conference while the DJ, bless him, had the sense to fade the music down to almost nothing. The silence felt right somehow. "We'll need 3 private rooms," Michael announced, his voice carrying just enough authority to keep the murmurs down. "1 for immediate family, 1 for affected parties, and 1 for document processing. Please remain in the main hall until called." I took a seat near the exit, my legs finally feeling their age. Funny how standing up for yourself can take more out of you than a day of physical labor. The folder sat light in my lap now, like it had given up its burden. Susan stood frozen where the ceremony had ended, still in her mother-of-the-bride blue silk. I watched her face go from angry to uncertain to something close to fear as reality sank in. The bouquet she'd been clutching, probably cost more than a month's rent at my new place, slipped from her fingers. It hit the carpet with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. My hands were steady as I pulled out the final ledger. 30 years of careful records reduced to simple math. Dates, amounts, interest, all laid out in clean columns. Each number represented a moment when they'd come to me in need, and I'd opened my heart along with my wallet. Each figure carried the weight of a promise made and broken. Michael cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitaker, if you'll join us in the first room, we can begin reviewing the totals." I stood up slowly, clutching my father's watch in one hand and the ledger in the other. Time to let the numbers speak their truth. Michael led us into what looked like a bridal preparation room, all cream walls and floating mirrors. Fitting in its way, we were about to strip away a lot of carefully applied facades. Thomas and Susan filed in behind me, followed by Jim Harrison and 2 other guests I recognized from the local Chamber of Commerce. You ever notice how a room feels different when truth finally shows up? The air gets thicker somehow. I set my copies on a small vanity table that still held Susan's makeup bag. "I've prepared 2 options," I said, keeping my voice as level as if I was discussing the weather. "We can handle this through immediate satisfaction of the total debt, or we can structure a binding repayment plan secured by liens on property." Susan's fingers twisted her pearl necklace, my late wife's birthday gift to her. "Daddy, please, we can talk about this privately." "I believe we're past private discussions," Michael cut in smoothly. "Mr. Whitaker has documentation of substantial loans, plus evidence of unauthorized account access and what appears to be deliberate misrepresentation to creditors." The scratch of Michael's pen on his legal pad filled the silence. I remembered that same careful scratching sound from decades ago, teaching Susan her letters at our kitchen table. Amazing how memories sneak up on you at moments like these. Thomas leaned forward, all his bluster gone. What's the total?" I slid the summary page across, watched their eyes track down to the bottom line, heard Susan's sharp intake of breath. "This is impossible," she whispered. "We don't have—" She stopped, probably remembering Jim Harrison's presence. "That's why I've drafted a confession of judgment," Michael said, producing more papers. "It provides for structured payments, but triggers immediate asset liquidation upon default, including real estate holdings. The room's fancy wallpaper seemed to press in closer. Someone's phone buzzed, ignored. "Mr. Whitaker," Susan started, her voice wobbling. "Dad, I'm so—" I held up my hand. "I'm not interested in apologies, just signatures." A soft knock interrupted us. The venue manager, Lisa, poked her head in. "I'm sorry, but given the unexpected legal proceedings, we're informing guests that the reception portion of the evening will not be proceeding as planned." Funny how formal language tries to soften hard facts. What she meant was, "The party's over, folks. Truth has a way of killing celebrations." Michael finished, with the notary stamps. He'd thought to bring one, bless him, and slid the final document to me first. My signature felt weightless, like I was just confirming something that had always been true. Thomas signed next, then Susan. Neither would meet my eyes. I didn't need them to. I picked up my father's watch and my copy of the papers. The door seemed heavier when I pushed it open, or maybe that was just the weight of finality settling in. Montemar. Hallway had filled with guests, their faces a mix of shock and something darker. Whispers followed me like autumn leaves. Their own father threw him out of his own house, claiming medical expenses while buying that boat. I straightened my tie, checked that my collar was even. Old habits die hard. Behind me I could hear Susan starting to cry, but it sounded more like frustration than sorrow. Thomas was arguing with Jim. Harrison in harsh whispers about temporary cash flow issues. Michael appeared at my elbow. "We should return to the main hall for the formal reading." "Are you ready?" I patted my jacket pocket, feeling the edges of justice waiting to be voiced. "Been ready for quite a while, cousin." The walk back toward the main hall felt like crossing a bridge. No way back, only forward. Each step took me further from the father they'd tried to erase and closer to the man who'd finally said, "Enough." Through the double doors I could see the remaining guests gathered in loose clusters, all pretense of celebration abandoned. Michael moved ahead to prepare the lectern for our final act. I adjusted my cuffs, took a steadying breath and followed him in. Back in the main hall, the late afternoon sun slanted through stained glass, painting everyone in awkward shades of judgment. Michael stood at the lectern, his voice carrying that precise legal tone that makes simple words sound like carved stone. "As officiant and counsel, I must formally announce the resolution of outstanding financial obligations." He adjusted his glasses, probably more for effect than need. "Based on notarized documentation and witnessed confessions of judgment, the following terms are now in effect." I kept my place near the back wall, hands clasped behind me. Have you ever watched a house of cards collapse? It's not the speed that gets you, it's the inevitability. Primary residences at 1842 Maple Drive and 327 Oakwood Lane will be subject to immediate liens, Michael continued. Investment accounts ending in 4471 and 8823 are frozen pending liquidation to satisfy documented debts. Additional properties, including the lake house and rental units, will be listed for sale within 30 days. A woman I didn't recognize had her phone up recording. Several others followed suit. In this age, I suppose disgrace needs its digital witnesses. Susan stood frozen by the cake table, that expensive wedding cake now forgotten. Thomas gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles went white. Jim, my former son-in-law with his failed business ventures and empty promises, seemed to shrink as three men in expensive suits stepped away from him. I recognized them as his latest potential investors. Furthermore, Michael's tone sharpened, any claims regarding Mr. Whitaker's competency or financial status are formally withdrawn. All creditor notifications based on those claims are being retracted as we speak. The whispers started like wind through dry leaves. Betrayal seemed to echo from every corner. A cluster of guests by the gift table turned their backs when Susan looked their way. Thomas tried to approach one of his golf club friends, but the man suddenly needed to check his phone. The storm of their social collapse brought no joy, just a hollow sort of rightness, like finally setting a broken bone. My phone buzzed. 3 creditors in quick succession. Hold released. Account status restored. Our sincerest apologies for any inconvenience. Someone, probably the best man trying to salvage something, called out, "A toast to family?" The suggestion died in embarrassed silence. I adjusted my tie, checked my father's watch, and moved toward the exit. The evening light through the doors looked like escape. Like tomorrow, A few guests nodded as I passed. One elderly woman touched my sleeve and whispered, "Good for you." I didn't stop. The venue's front steps felt lighter going down than they had coming up. The air hit me first, fresh-cut grass from the landscapers, rain coming in from the west. I inhaled deeply, tasting the edge of the storm. Behind me, through the heavy doors, I could still hear Michael concluding the formal reading, but I didn't need to witness the end. Some things finish themselves once set in motion. My phone lit up again with another creditor retraction. I silenced it and slipped it into my pocket alongside Dad's watch. The weight felt right there, like truth settling back into place. Thunder rolled across the sky, still distant but promising. I turned the corner onto Madison Street, where tomorrow waited with a 9 a.m. appointment to view a ground-floor apartment. The rental agent had seemed pleased when I mentioned paying cash. A few raindrops hit the sidewalk around me, dark circles spreading on the concrete. I didn't look back at the venue. Didn't need to. Some chapters closed themselves. The thunder growled closer as I walked toward the bus. Stop, each step carrying me further from what was and closer to what would be. The rain began to fall in earnest now, but I didn't mind. Clean rain has a way of washing things new. The next morning's sunlight felt different somehow, cleaner, like the world had hit reset. I met the rental agent at 9 sharp, my certified check ready from bonds I'd redeemed years ago. Funny how paper can weigh so much in your pocket when it represents change. "The previous tenant was meticulous," she said, unlocking the door. "Even had the floors refinished before leaving. You know that moment when you step into a space and something just clicks." The living room opened up before me, morning light streaming through east-facing windows. No echoes of betrayal here, no whispers about burden or cost, just quiet possibility. "I'll take it," I said before she could launch into her prepared speech about amenities. She blinked, probably used to more hesitation from prospective tenants my age. "Don't you want to see the light's right," I told her. "Sometimes that's all you need to know." The paperwork took 20 minutes. My hands didn't shake once as I signed. The agent kept glancing at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle, especially when I handed over the certified funds without batting an eye. By afternoon, the furniture delivery crew had everything placed exactly as I'd mapped out. A comfortable armchair angled toward those morning windows, a solid oak desk that reminded me of my father's, and there, above the fireplace, a mantle swept clean of history, waiting for something new. I made one last trip to the bank vault. The manager, different from yesterday's chaos, nodded professionally as I signed out my box for the final time. The folders inside felt lighter now that their contents had done their work. I closed the metal door with a solid click that felt like punctuation. Back home, yes, already thinking of it as home, I unwrapped the single frame I'd brought from the storage unit. Simple, elegant walnut with a curved glass dome beneath it, just the right size for what needed to be displayed. My father's gold pocket watch caught the afternoon light as I positioned it carefully under the dome. The worn face that had marked so many moments of his life and mine seemed to glow with quiet dignity. I adjusted it until it stood perfectly upright, a sentinel of better times, both past and future. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael, the lawyer cousin. First tranche of forced sale, proceeds received and allocated. Full satisfaction expected within 30 days. Public notices of asset disposition filed with county recorder. Reputational advisory bulletins distributed to relevant business networks per standard practice. I read it twice, letting each formal phrase sink in. Legal consequences landing precisely as documented. Public truth archived where it couldn't be buried or twisted. The machinery of justice, both financial and social, turning exactly as designed. Standing in the center of my new living room, I felt my breathing settle into a rhythm that matched the watch's steady tick. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across hardwood floors that held no memories of betrayal. No bitter echoes bounced off these walls, just the clean sound of consequence meeting truth. I moved closer to the mantel, studying my father's watch beneath its protective dome. The gold caught the light like a beacon, like a heart finding its proper beat after too long out of sync. All those years of careful record-keeping, all those signatures, preserved in that vault, they'd done more than protect my finances. They'd restored something deeper, the alignment of truth with consequence. Looking at that watch, Remembering my father's voice teaching me about integrity, I heard myself speak to the quiet room. A man's worth is never measured by his cost. The words rang clear in the space, settling into the corners like they belonged there, like they'd been waiting to be said in exactly this place at exactly this moment, beneath the silent witness of my father's gold watch marking time, with perfect, unfailing honesty.